So we'll start with a practice. That sounds good. So just assuming a comfortable posture. Closing the eyes if you want. Just practicing that mode of allowing whatever's moving through the sense of hearing, the sense of seeing, smelling, tasting, the sense of the body, including emotions, feelings, sensations, and allowing whatever's moving through the space of thinking. No need to resist or struggle with any of it. Just to welcome and allow. And in our experience, noticing where attention is, the part of the mind that highlights, might be highlighting thinking or hearing or the body. Noticing where attention is, how is it moving, and then inviting it to rest in the sensations of the body and the breath. Maybe a sense of pressure or warmth, coolness. In the body, and if the attention gets pulled away, starts to chase thinking, gets pulled into a thought, it's very normal. Just bringing it back with kindness, patience, and commitment. Back and resting in the body and breath. Opening the eyes when you are ready. front row seats.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so I'm Doug Worthen, and maybe just I'll give you a little backstory of how I got into mindfulness, which why do I do this? So I went to Middlesex, and actually I'm supposed to use this even for the camera. So I went to Middlesex, loved it, and really cared about sports. It's kind of all I cared about. Went to the University of Virginia to play lacrosse. And there was this thing that kept happening in lacrosse where I would get into games, and I remember this one play in particular against Princeton where I missed, like as a defender, I was a defenseman, and I missed this ground ball, which is like a very easy play in lacrosse. And I missed it, and then I also, not only did I miss it, but I kept like running down the field thinking I had it in my stick because my body was so tense. And so basically what was happening was my attention was cycling into worry thoughts, right? So it was in the thoughts, not in the game, right? And because of that, there was a combination of just like living in this terrible story of like my parents, my coaches were gonna just be really disappointed in me, and so I get tense, and then I couldn't perform, and that kept happening, and so it was like really painful, and it finally kind of broke me to a point where I was like, I need to figure out why this is happening, and 3 days later, my uncle gave me a book called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And I was like, kind of mad. I was like, I've had 16 years of education, like really good education, and this is like, no one's ever introduced this to me. And so that's really the core behind a lot of why I'm in a school doing this, is because I think everyone should be introduced to it in a clear way, and then they can decide if they want to establish a practice, but everyone should know that it's there. And again, through that was, I got into kind of the business world, and it took me basically stage 4 lymphoma, a bone marrow transplant, to see, I'd seen how the practice was helpful in so many other areas of life, not just sports, but in business and relationships, but to see it was kind of like the lifeline for me going through, a pretty awful a couple of years, and the same thing, in the hospital bed, when the attention would want to cycle into, am I going to be dead in, a week or a month, and then see the body tense up. I just see how I'd wear myself down doing that. So it was like, coming back, breath by breath, see how it unfolds. And it was always there for me. And so it came out of that very clear that I wanted to share it with youth. And, that's, it just happened to actually work out at Middlesex. So they gave me a call, and I'll get into a little bit about how that started and how it evolved at Middlesex. I do think can't even tell you how happy I am that we have Adam here and Ben and John Luke. When it comes to how to bring mindfulness into a school in a very kind of integrative way, and Adam is has incredible experience with this too. So I think you're going to get two different views: a K through 12 school. We're a 9 through 12, and again, they're private schools, but hopefully the intention here is that this becomes more and more common in all schools. Okay, so this won't be really about the science of it. I feel like in general, if you're not convinced that this is a good thing to bring into schools, this isn't the talk for you. You should probably just do some research, and in general, I always relate it to maybe this is a terrible thing, but climate change. If you really don't want to believe in climate change, you can find a couple articles that say climate change isn't real. But for the most part, if you're looking at the general research here, it's going in the right direction. Let's put it that way when it comes to mindfulness in schools. So I feel like it's kind of a no-brainer at this point. And there's a lot of different models. So this is going to be really about like a little bit of the different models and then kind of seeing kind of two models in particular. So one is, they'll have a school will have a particular teacher, maybe an English teacher who's really excited about practice. Maybe they're starting a group. They start a group with other faculty members or in their kind of free time, right? So again, part of this is like the time. There's not much time in anyone who's a teacher here, like in their lives, to kind of do a lot of that. The other one is like an outside organization coming in. You hire which is a wonderful way too to get a community started. I think there's a bunch of organizations that do wonderful work bringing, mindfulness into schools. Again, and they kind of have their, all of these have their pluses and minuses. And then the third one, which is going to be the kind of the one we talk about most tonight, is this part where you have someone, in the community kind of holding it, and that's their dedicated job, to hold it for students, faculty, staff, parents, alumni, right? And that's I think we're obviously very biased. We think it's a really good model, and we kind of think that that's kind of where it's going to end up going, this whole kind of movement. We could be wrong. So at Middlesex, first piece was a school assembly, 2009. The assistant head of school basically called me up, was like, we hear you're into mindfulness, you want to come give a talk. So a friend and I gave a talk on mindfulness, started a little momentum to a Sunday afternoon voluntary class for students. All right, can't believe students gave up their Sunday afternoon, but they did, and it was 12 students. Next semester, I was like, okay, how do we bring this into the school day? Thursday morning, right? Don't ever start a mindfulness class in morning with teenagers. That was my first big, that's my one of the things don't do. So we did get 14 students, right, to sign up because it was in the week and that was more helpful, but it was early in the morning, so attendance was not great. Then we moved it to Friday evening, right? We had 40 students, right? So there was kind of a buzz starting to happen. And Friday afternoon, a better time, clearly. And there was an interesting point in this. At this point, I was a pretty experienced practitioner, as in, I'd done a bunch of 10-day retreats, a month-long. I'd say I had a few months of intensive retreat practice, kind of an on and off practice up until about when I went through cancer, and then a very much more committed practice after that. But I felt like I needed more. And that was this is an interesting piece. As a mindfulness teacher in a school, I was like, there's a couple questions I'm answering because I read it in a book, versus really saw it from my experience and my practice. And so I was like, I have to just dive in and get more practice, especially if I'm going to bring this to faculty and staff and parents who I'm going to be practicing with for, a decade. So did the 3-month retreat at Insight Meditation Society, which is, it's like an hour away from here. And that was incredibly helpful, and just kind of felt ready after that. And so started to basically commit my week to the community. And what that looked like was I was able to, when students were free, I could create groups of them in their free blocks, like meditation groups, all during the week, right? And we had 65 students sign up for that. We're a school of 400. And at the same time, the assistant head and I taught a class. It was a 4-credit English class for seniors. And we had 15 that, a big wait list there. So there's a lot of momentum, right? And at this point, the faculty they had gotten presentations by me, but they still hadn't, I think people sometimes will say it has to come through the faculty. And I think there's some truth in some ways, but in our case, it was the other way around. So it's really, there's no right way for it to come in, or it can come in any way. And that was a big moment in that we had a lot of debate around, should this be required, right? And we decided to go with it and be required, and we kind of modeled it off this curriculum called .B that was kind of meant to be a required course. But that felt like a big moment, because like were kids not going to, were they not going to like it if they were kind of told or have to sit in class and do this? And again, the core pieces of this are, I think the whole program is, we want you to learn about it. You do not have to practice. Don't believe what I say. Trust your experience. Really these core pieces of, telling a teenager to have healthy skepticism and to take what they want, if anything, I think that's how it should be introduced. And at the same time, there was enough faculty interest there. The kind of faculty were hearing about it, and we had about, the first faculty staff session, we had a bunch of different groups. Same thing, I would kind of maneuver around their schedules to when they were free and create groups. And, we had 25 in that first semester. And we started level 2. So the ones we've introduced, it's like, how do we keep supporting the students, that we've introduced in this first semester class? So we started offering these kind of voluntary level 2 courses. Again, I'm maneuvering around their schedules to where they have free time to create these groups. And then sports. There's I feel like a lot of athletes. Our school is very much like, there are a lot of, athletics is a big part of our school. And so it kind of created another kind of different type of 2B for ones who really wanted to, focus on how this was going to help them in athletics. And then another really important piece of this was the parent course. And, I think not just because the parents talk, and it's, I think the parents, one, they get to see what their students are, what their children are learning, but also they talk amongst themselves. And, I think if you're worried if some parents, feel like they're on the outside, but I think bringing them in, having them get a taste of it, experience it, is a really important part. And also for funding, right? So we had a significant donation after that first semester that was like significant. That for the mindfulness program, that was like everyone paid attention. In a way that was very, and again, we're in a very fortunate school, and that's possible. But another reason I think and we're a boarding school. We have three quarters boarding, so we don't have many day parents actually. But especially for a day school, and Adam will talk about this, where there's a lot more options for a day school where they can really get the parents, and the parents feel more part of the community. So a lot of benefits there. And then the next year we started this all school practice. So we meet as a community on Wednesdays, and it's called chapel. The senior gives a talk. It's a 40-minute kind of meeting of the community, and we just started guiding practices. So I'll guide a practice for 5 to 7 minutes at the beginning of that session. So again, it's kind of a reminder, an important reminder for the community every week, even though because they've all kind of taken the semester. So again, moving more, making sure we capture all new students. At first we were just doing freshmen, now capturing new sophomores, new juniors. And then another important piece was this level 3. It was really starting to empower the students to guide, to learn how to guide so they can share it with their friends, with their community. So it's not just me, right? So there's other, this is a community practice, and people starting to feel empowered to lead. And that included the club. So this is like one of our first required mindfulness classes. Anyway, we kind of got tossed around to any room on campus, and this happened to be the one room that was open, and it's kind of the nicest room on campus. Anyway, so it was. Anyway, we felt very blessed. Okay, so this kind of keeping the momentum going. We started a retreat on campus every summer, right? So we at this point we have faculty, we have going level 1, level 2s. We have students level 1s, level 2s, level 3s. We have a summer retreat, so faculty can start to dive in more, right? Faculty, staff, alums, right? So more of the community diving in more to practice. And we actually had Will Kabat-Zinn, John Kabat-Zinn's son, went to Middlesex, and so he led that with my wife Jess Morey back there, who leads IBME, and so then we started, the faculty and staff, starting to get them guiding so they can kind of bring it to, where they want to, their classes, on their sports team, so that's kind of growing bit by bit. We started a conference just to help kind of get the ball rolling with other schools. We started to partner with IBME with doing a teacher training, which some people here are actually in. And that's on campus, a couple of retreats on campus. And we now have a weekly drop-in. That's an important piece, it feels like. It's like where every week someone from the community gets to lead it. It's a drop-in meditation. And it's, I'm not leading it. And, sometimes it's students will come or faculty will be joined by a couple of faculty. But that's kind of a nice drop-in if people want it. And then 10% Happier. We were very fortunate. They've been very generous, and they partnered with us, and so we have the whole community has the app, and that's students, faculty, staff, parents, and they are building they're actually it'll be done in like 11 months is a meditation room. They're building one in this new building so I'm ridiculously spoiled. So this is this is Will Kabat-Zinn and Jess leading this is the first kind of retreat we did, 4-day retreat in our chapel. We kind of clear out the pews and it turns into a beautiful meditation hall. This is this is amazing. So this is in the summer, this is the campus, but all these people are kind of scattered all over doing like really slow walking, like zombie walking, but they're still having people come and like tour on campus. So like there's some of the funniest comments. Anyway, that's been an adventure. So this would be an overview of the program. So students 1, 2, and 3, faculty 1, 2, and 3, parents level 1, and there's 2, a monthly drop-in for them to keep them going. The weekly chapel practice, and this has kind of grown more as in athletics. So we have, a lot of the afternoons I'll meet with teams, and there's also this thing called an ACE program for kind of these sophomores that are very kind of recruitable athletes, but they get an hour and a half of mindfulness every week as part of that leadership. It's kind of a leadership and kind of health development program. And then retreats. We've done there's 3 published papers that have some interesting stuff around, at least if you want to read more about like what exactly they were saying and they responded to certain questions. They're mostly about the freshman required course. But there's also one sports one that's pretty interesting. And then we have a free document online that kind of sums up our program that can be helpful. I think people are, how is this funded, right? How does a school fund this? And I think that's a really important question. For us, it basically was, I was fortunate to be able to I was living at my mom's house and with my wife who loved it. And, I just was getting small stipends, and I was just like, this has to happen, and my mom does my laundry. It's great. And then the second piece, it started to become part-time, and then the school really were just stepped up in such a beautiful way. We had a trustee who started to pay part of my salary. There was, the parent support. Those were both really important pieces. And then the school just continues to step up. And I think, Kathy Giles, our headmaster, I'm in infinite gratitude for her and her vision and support through all of this. Anyway, I just took a picture of like our schedule and kind of like what it looks like to be in this position. So, we have 40-minute blocks. Advisee meetings we have every week. We have 6 advisees typically, and you meet with them for a block. But so, student mindfulness 1, student mindfulness 3 guiding, 2B 1. So this would be like a typical fall, the parent in the afternoon, sports teams. But you can kind of see faculty mindfulness 2, 3. That would be kind of a typical week for my position. And I just to kind of touch again on this, and I mentioned a little bit, was like always an invitation, healthy skepticism, take what you want, and free to use these in any way that supports your values, like what you're interested in. I think I started practicing kind of to be a better lacrosse player, right? That's not my intention anymore. So I feel like people can be tight around that, and I just feel like people have their own intentions, but often it leads to such a wonderful, wholesome, it just continues to be this exploration of the mind that's, and however you get in the door, it is, it seems like most people don't take this to use it in a way that's going to be harmful to the world. So this gives you a sense of what does a class, an intro class, look like, the required class, and overview. What is mindfulness? Why practice? Maybe some research. Getting to know attention and awareness. Right? What are those things? Right? And how do you stabilize attention? Right? That's a big one. And then, as we stabilize attention, we start to develop body awareness, so body scans. Right? Starting to feel the body. Where can we feel the body? Where can't we? What's it like when we scan the attention through it over and over? Oh, we start to feel our body more. What else do we feel? Emotions, feelings, right? So then how do we relate to those feelings? It's really important. What's the relationship, a skillful relationship to have emotions, right? And what are all the different types of emotions and feelings? And then we go to thoughts, the space in our experience that we have, thoughts. The narrator, the images, the chatter, the voices, where are they? Like, where do we experience them? Are they like up here? Are they back here? Or the speed of thoughts? And some of the more engaging conversations in a student classroom is like checking out their thoughts and like the space between them. Like, who are you? If like you notice it and then like the debates around like, well, are you your thoughts or not? And again, there's, it's all kind of trust your experience and go with it, but it is so fun to have that. And so powerful to like, oh, there's a thought, like maybe I don't have to believe it. Maybe it's not true. And talk about important for the well-being of a human, let alone an adolescent. And then we talk about how to bring this into movement, like walking as we move through campus throughout the day, in athletics. And freedom from impulses. This is another one we do where we do a practice where we don't move. Where you kind of commit to see if you can notice an itch, an impulse, without acting on it, and see what happens. Does it move? Oh, it passes away without us, like, having to act on it. We're not controlled by our impulses, and this is a practice. So again, for all humans, let alone, an adolescent who has issues with impulsivity and the impulse to pick up their phone, to notice they can, oh, there it is. Can sense it, see how it moves, and let it pass without having to be kind of controlled by it. And then we talk more about these kind of, the negativity bias of the mind and ways to kind of balance that by cultivating things like gratitude, loving kindness, compassion, empathy, things like that. And relationship, this piece of how, when we're with our friends, we're with our, our teachers, our family, Are we attuned and present, or are we kind of in our own little world or own little story? It's how it works in relationship. So these are just some of the research papers. So this is a mindfulness journal, and I just absolutely love this. This is the Likert scale, where like it's a 1 to 5. So anything like, so this is 4.9 is the class average on this top one. That would be like almost everyone saying strongly agree or agree, right? So if it was 3, it would be like neutral. 4 would be like everyone agrees. 5 would be everyone strongly agrees, right? So the top one here, and this list is like really long of all the questions, is the mindfulness program should continue to be a requirement for all new students at our school. Like, that's incredible. Like, think about that. Like, what class could you have and that be, like, that would be the number one thing, you know? I mean, I think that that sums it up in so many ways. And we had so many debates whether this should be required, but they just see the value of this, of people being introduced to this. And the ones who would not sign up for this course get to see the importance and are seeing the importance too. Are they going to sign up for a level 2, right? Or a level 3? Maybe not. And most don't, you know? But the majority don't. But they get the practice every week in their chapel, and they've kind of been exposed to it, right? So maybe they're practicing in the room, maybe they're using the app. There's a lot of different ways they can be practicing. And I think, you know, at this point, like having, you know, from the top is so important. You know, and sometimes it takes a long time, or it takes a while for everyone to kind of start to see the value. But this is just 2 quotes from, you know, our dean of students and our head of school. And this is from our director of health, who is right there, Meg, and Ken Risley, who's our athletic director. I just feel like it was just to throw some quotes about the administration. And Meg, would you want to say anything just from your perspective?
Just to support what Doug is saying, I was at the school. I've been there for a couple of years when he first came, and so you know, got to see the evolution of this amazing program for us as a school. It really has changed the school in so many ways. And for me, you know, I felt like the benefit that I saw or continue to see is, you know, I work with kids and I work with teenagers, and obviously those years are pretty rocky and can be filled with emotional or mental strife, and you know, and I'm seeing them in those moments, right? In the health center, I'm seeing them in the moments when they're in crisis of some kind, and you know, it strikes me as a way, you know, teenagers automatically, maybe not just teenagers, think I suck and I'm gonna die, right? So those are the thoughts and the feelings that they have in that moment. And I, you know, maybe before being a practitioner myself of mindfulness, I would spend a lot of time trying to talk them out of that, you know, talk them out of that thought and that feeling. And now, you know, the kids and I have some understanding of how to just witness that, you know, be witness to that thought or emotion, and kind of, as I say, not believe it necessarily, and have some healthy skepticism about that, and a little equanimity with that, you know. So it's been really transformative, I think, as a community for me personally, and then for the school, I think.
Thank you. So this is, I mean, I think part of it too. This is Ben, and he'll talk a little bit about this. This is him. You know, I think the power of, especially the level 3s of the students, getting them guiding, getting them facilitating. and then having them, you know, Jess and I were at Bowdoin over the weekend, like having them share the practice too, feeling empowered to do that. So this is just a picture of him at Bowdoin. And I will pass on the mic to Adam. Actually, I'll just maybe take a few questions if anyone has any, and then I can pass it on to Adam. And we'll have time at the end too to have kind of an overview question period too. Yeah.
This is very inspiring. Thank you. I'm wondering about translation, this kind of program from a private school to a public school with the model that you're inhabiting.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. I'm just wondering about
Yeah.
the feasibility and financial support.
Totally, and I think that's the future work of Ben and Jean-Luc. You know, I think for us, I think it's it's so tricky. I mean, I've talked to a couple principals, and you know, who are just like, there's like, well, can't you just get the parents to fund a position? And they're like, nope. Like, so I'm the wrong person to ask on that. But I think that's certainly the intention long term is like, I mean, this is easy to do in a way. Like, I mean, it's for a private school, it's cheap in a private school world, most private schools, to just hire one more faculty member and have a significant, again, potentially significant impact. And that's just harder to do. And there's a lot more, but can be done. And I think this is going to be a couple more years or more when that starts to be common too, hopefully.
Can I partially answer that?
Yeah, great.
So we're both in Arlington, and we found our PTO very helpful. I mean, not a ton of money, but get us the Mind Up curriculum or send some of us to Mindful School for some training. And then a lot in terms of special ed, and I mean, she's a social worker, I'm an OT, going into even just some grade levels, some year, you know, like this year I'm in kindergarten all the time, not all the time, but doing some mindfulness in kindergarten this year. And then they're gonna be first graders next year, and those teachers will be exposed, and then the new kindergartners will come in. So, like, it can happen, but we're sort of sorting that same question out in terms of like funding and writing a grant and how do you make it happen. So it's possible. I think I'm feeling more hopeful too, just hearing everything you're saying. It's just nice to see this room full of people. Like for me, we felt so like in our own minds, you know. It's nice to see
Yeah.
people working on things.
Thank you.
I love that.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. Awesome. Anyone else? Yep.
What's your training?
Yeah, great. So my training, I would say, again, the retreats have been a big part of that, obviously, in the daily practice. I was kind of a training fiend. I was like, I did, you know, the .B, did MBSR, or the practicum, and then, you know, we just kind of get my hands on learning to breathe, and we did the MEI, kind of mindful schools, year long, did, you know, so all the different kind of curriculum. A lot of them you can just buy, but a lot of them you have to do. And I just feel like each of them has been important. Like that's the thing. It's like, you know, unfortunately some of them are expensive, but I just, you know, like every one I get, there's like a piece that's like, oh, that fits my community. So I think that's the piece is like, what's going to fit the community you're teaching to? Because there's like, you know, if I was forced to teach a particular curriculum, like this program would be dead. You know, I have to just attune and adjust to what is working and what's not. And so if anyone tells you, like, I guess that's tricky if everyone tells you you have to teach something. I think there's a red flag there.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of genesis and first couple of years of development of a program inspired by Doug's work in Texas. And actually, early in his slides, he had mentioned these like 3 models that schools are trying, either finding an interested teacher or hiring an outside person to come in, or having them their own director. And I will say that before I moved to Texas, I lived in Vermont, and I taught social studies at a high school in St. Johnsbury. And I was that sort of interested teacher who was doing that stuff. Hey. And in that context, I was able to do a faculty class before school, and taught a curriculum to my ninth graders, and worked in a student club, and did stuff in the dorms. But it always felt like there was this like vast sea of possibility that potentially I could be doing, that I was really only able to sort of work in these corners because the core of my job was, working as a teacher at a boarding school, which is already pretty overbooked. So when I got to Austin, I was studying to get my MFA at UT, and so I had some extra time. In my second year at UT, my wife was entering her second year teaching at St. Andrew's Episcopal School. And this was a school with 3 divisions, so K through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12, on 2 different campuses. Episcopal identity, pretty robust SEL curriculum, and they sort of had a self-understanding of being a school that was a leader in SEL. And usually, what that meant was a curriculum that was largely focused in the lower grades around sort of understanding their emotions and having like positive modeling for relationships. And so I had been in conversation with Doug at that point about the possibility of grant funding, and was finishing my degree at UT, and so approached the headmaster at St. Andrews, basically proposing the idea that I do some pilot sessions at the school for free. That here's the proposal actually, that I offer 6 sessions in lower school and middle school chapels, so that all faculty and students in those levels could sort of get some exposure to mindfulness, that I offer some sessions in the classroom to ninth graders, and that I offer a faculty course at the upper school. And this was a way for me to sort of get some exposure to basically everybody at the school pretty quickly, and then to get feedback from them, basically evaluations saying, is this something that was helpful for you? Do you think that it would be helpful to have more education in this regard? Because the first time that I went and talked to the headmaster, I said, it's come to my attention that a lot of students and faculty at your school are really ripe for more mindfulness instruction. And his response was, really? So it wasn't entirely clear to the administration that this was actually something useful. And so this pilot allowed me to then bring him a stack of evaluations, and then led to conversations between him and faculty members, and seeing, oh, this is actually something that we want to explore more. So then the proposal that I came back to him with in April at the end of this pilot project was basically built around the grant funding that Doug had clued me into. And it was basically a contract for a 3-year sort of way of building a program. And so year 1 I would be half-time, year 2 I would be 3/4, year 3 I'd be full-time, and the grant would gradually pass off my salary to the school. So the first year the grant paid for 75% of my salary, second year 50%, third year 25%, sort of training the school to figure out how to pay for it. And what that meant was, like, for my first year, what the ask was 25% of a half-time position that the school paid for, which I think ended up being like $6,000 to basically have like an in-house mindfulness person for that year, which I think worked in the school's favor, and they said yes to. Yeah, and the goal at this point. So I started by mentioning that I had been that interested teacher at St. Johnsbury in Vermont, and had only gotten so far. At the upper school at St. Andrews, they had also done the let's hire a person from an outside organization to offer after-school mindfulness and yoga stuff for upper schoolers, and that was a well-loved and well-attended sort of corner of an opportunity for kids at the upper school. And so again, that only got so far. And so this was a chance to start to create a language and a skill set and a series of practices that had some communication between the divisions, between students and faculty, and ultimately parents. It was sort of a tall order. So in the first year, what the pilot sessions allowed me to do was basically identify who were the faculty members and what were the grade levels that were most immediately amenable to ramping this up. And so the 6th grade teaching team actually had already come to me and said, we want this fully in what we do in our grade level. My wife worked in 9th grade, which was helpful. And so that was another sort of go-to place. And so the places I started first were faculty courses, and then linking a series of mindfulness lessons in the science class for 6th graders when they were doing their brain studies unit, sort of understanding as they were learning objectively what's going on with the brain, doing practices around attention, impulse control, bodily awareness, that kind of thing, and seeing it from the subjective lens. And then worked in English courses with the 9th graders and did a series there. And that's kind of where I started out. And then as that happened in my first semester of my first year, other teachers started to come to me. And so the 3rd grade teaching team came to me and said, we'd love you to sort of enrich what we're doing in our sort of morning SEL curriculum. And so sort of started a series of lessons there. And a bunch of other, visited advisories in the middle school, taught a mindfulness over test stress course before school for upper school students, which then became the Mindfulness Club. And actually, I guess we're still at the phase where we meet on Thursday mornings. So maybe if I do it, although I doubt at a day school that Friday nights would really fly. But we'll see. Maybe I'll get 40 if we do that then. Taught sessions in religious studies courses for seniors, including a year-end. So the final for this course, Holy Work and Holy Rest, was a day-long meditation retreat, and this was during their finals week. And so we sort of ran a day of silence in the middle, toward the end, really, of these seniors' finals week for the students who were in the class. And then included a year-end training for faculty and drop-in sessions and websites with guided practices that went along with these things. So that by the end of the first year, basically where things landed was that there was a grade level in each division that got the sort of core basic skills training that was developmentally geared for that division. So 3rd, 6th, 9th, and then ultimately 12th. And then faculty in each division had their own class, and then working on finding opportunities for students in each of those divisions to plug back in as they saw fit. So then this is year 2, so I'm in year 2 now. And the developments, I'm going to sort of explain it by division level. So the 3rd grade teaching team asked for the series of, I think, 10 lessons last year to be basically year-round, so to keep coming. And so that's a more integrated part of the 3rd grade week. And then different teachers in the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 5th grade have asked for me to come in for different individual sessions. The kindergarten team has sort of worked with a number of practices in mindfulness and movement that are really landing with those kids. And so that's I'm sort of allowing that to do its own thing. But where things are headed basically is that what they're planting in K is stuff that then I'm working with the 1st and 2nd grades on. So that it's basically now every 3 years starting in K, where there's a sort of basic skills practice set that's taught that's then used for the next 2 years. And then 3rd grade, there's another basic skills practice set that's a little bit more developmentally advanced that's then applied for the next 2 years. And then we move on to the 6th grade and so on and so on. In each of the divisions, this question I have is like how to support ongoing practice for students who want it. And Doug has Mindfulness 2 at the upper school and Mindfulness 3, and he has Mindfulness Club. I think right now at our upper school, just Mindfulness Club serves that purpose. At the lower school, that's a big question because K through 5 is this long phase of humanity that you get them all in a room together, and some are babysitting the others, and they're not all practicing together. And so where that feels like it's landing right now is as home practice and is in supporting their parents with resources and their own practices to give their students ways of practicing at home. So parent classes have been really popular. And I also get emails occasionally from parents who say, my third grader came home and guided me in a meditation when I looked stressed. And so that's pretty great. In the middle school, I've expanded the mindfulness in the brain to also include for sixth graders work in their social studies class around loving kindness practices. Just in thinking, when students are moving into the middle school phase, what is the sort of crucial ledge that they're about to be pushed off that I can try to prepare them for beyond simply the stress piece. And so much of it is this self-compassion piece and the sense of being in a group or not being in a group. And so worked this year to create a series of lessons with the sixth grade social studies teacher during their Utopia unit in thinking about what an ally is, what sort of the creation of groups is like, how tribalism has worked throughout human history, and how we can understand intergroup bias in the context of tribalism, and how we can do practices to start to challenge that impulse in ourselves to construct my group versus the other group. And so we did a series of loving kindness practices that basically followed, I think, a traditional route of beginning with a close ally or a close benefactor and beginning to expand that circle out to include people in the community and people outside of the St. Andrews community who these sixth graders knew but wouldn't necessarily consider anyone part of their group. And then working with how do we extend kindness to those people in a mindfulness or a meditative context. And then what does that look like when we are no longer meditating, and how does that affect us? And honestly, that was kind of a risk that I took. I didn't really think it was going to work, but it totally did. And I think part of that is the students at that point in the year felt comfortable with one another. They felt comfortable with doing that risk. And I think part of it is we started with mindfulness practice, and they saw how that they basically trusted the practice because they had seen how it had helped them with a sense of stress and being able to focus better and being able to understand themselves better. And so they had enough buy-in to give the loving kindness practices a shot. And so I think that was crucial in that way. In the middle school, they have the option of joining one club. And there's a certain club time, and so Mindfulness Club was up against pie eating club and Araby Frisbee Outdoors Club, and that's what's fun, and that's what it allows me. That's what being a full-time, or at least a regular mindfulness person at the school allows me to do. Chapel talks to the whole school, being able to lead the whole, or at least the whole division in mindfulness. One fun thing is to walk up there and to see, most of the 400 students, when they see that I'm about to lead a meditation, just sort of automatically shift in their chairs and sort of get in a more upright posture without being asked to or anything. I included some student feedback to give you a sense for where and how these lessons land differently in each divisional level. So at the lower school, these are two pretty common. Well, the most common comment is it helps me fall asleep at night. There are a lot of kids in the lower school who have developed a personal practice, daily personal practice, in the minutes before they fall asleep. But it helps me stay calm when I'm frustrated or sad. At chess tournaments, I use mindful breathing to not feel so stressed. And so in the lower grades, it really feels most often that students use it in the moment as a sort of as a way of regulating stress or difficult emotions or some intensity. And so rather than sort of connecting I'm going to do my daily practice and connect it to some other outcome, it's more in the moment I'm feeling this way and this is going to help me. Once we get into the middle school, they start to connect it a little bit more, I find, to performance anxiety. The kind of experience that Doug was describing in his lacrosse game, writ large, always, in every moment in middle school, right? Am I holding my backpack or am I too stressed? Am I looking this person in the eye or am I too stressed? And so finding ways of really connecting their sense of wanting to be at ease in all the things that they're trying to accomplish in middle school seems to be the way it lands for them. And then also really finding ways, I think, to grow that self-compassion and that loving kindness piece, I think is one of the goals that I have. And then at the upper school, I think the self-regulation and the under pressure kind of thing still lands at the upper school. But the direction we start to move toward is this direction of self-acceptance, self-exploration, these kinds of discussions of, what is a thought? These thoughts that are suddenly taking up so much more bandwidth in my mind. How can I relate to them more skillfully? And I'll have students come up to me and just like really be interested in those lessons specifically about, how can I look at and see this taskmaster in my head as something that doesn't have all the power. One student says, it has helped me be alone with who I truly am and to accept what I find inside me. Another says, now I can notice my emotions without letting them consume me. So where the program is right now and what the plans are for looking ahead, it feels like that doing a sort of course focus or a basic skills focus in every 3 grades feels sustainable. So K, 3, 6, 9, and then ultimately 12. And this doesn't mean that that mindfulness instruction is absent in the grades in between. It's just that the sort of let's do a class together once a week for 8 or 10 or 20 weeks is the focus in those grades. And then in the grades in between, it's asking, well, how can we integrate this with the teachers into their school day in a way that refers back to the lessons they got. Continuing to work with understanding like how can mindfulness be integrated into the curriculum of classrooms, be integrated into the advisory schedule, finding a faculty lead in each grade to support this integration that I was talking about. So finding faculty in 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, 7th, 8th, and so on to make sure that this keeps happening. Because even with a mindfulness director on campus, I can't be in all 13 grades at once, in all classrooms at once. And so finding ways really of integrating this into the faculty culture. And so in that regard, continuing to offer these faculty and parent courses with ongoing drop-in practice. And then, looking forward, I think every school has its sort of values focus and has the areas that are receiving the most energy as far as what the vision is really of the school. And in our school right now, there's a lot of work with anti-bias work throughout the school and a lot of work with peer-to-peer leadership. And so a lot of the discussions I've been having lately for these coming years are how can we start to link the mindfulness curriculum and mindfulness instruction to the anti-bias work we're doing, to the diversity work we're doing in school, and how can we link it to the peer-to-peer leadership work. And I think most of us in this room can already see a number of ways in which that's the case. And so the question is simply like on the ground, how do we start actually linking this programmatically? And then the goal is to inspired by what Doug's doing at Middlesex with these retreats, is to offer opportunities for adults at the beginning and ends of the school year to deepen their practice with retreats. And that might be a year out or so. Rather than give you lessons, I'll just end with that picture because it's so cute. Yeah, any questions? Yeah.
Thank you. This was very interesting. I'm wondering how long are the sessions? You talk about sessions. Do you take like the whole block, or is it like a brief intervention?
So for students, for 6th and 9th grade, it's the whole class, which is about 50 minutes. In 3rd grade, it's closer to 15 to 30, depending on the day. I think I read somewhere, I think maybe it was Daniel Rechstassen who said this, that it's a good rule of thumb not to guide a meditation practice that's more minutes long than the age of the student you're teaching it to. And that's like the maximum, right? And that tends to correspond. So it tends to look like a 10-minute mindfulness practice in the middle school, a 15-minute at the upper school, and a 3 to 5 at the lower school. Yeah.
And is it a combination of practice and talks? And
Yeah. So the evolution, I would say the evolution of my middle school and upper school courses has been in the direction of longer practice. When I first started out, I just thought that they couldn't handle a longer practice. And some of that came from the curricula I was teaching. The curricula seemed to assume that, that in a room of 9th graders that you should do a little 3-minute practice here and there, or even a 5-minute practice, or God forbid, a 10-minute practice. And the feedback I got early on was always, that one time we did a 10-minute practice was great. We should do longer than that every time. And finally, I took them up on that, and I think that really lands better for them, is in those upper school grades doing longer practices. But then, in a 40-minute or a 50-minute class that involves discussion, that involves introducing the lesson for the day, that involves practicing. Sometimes we'll do a 2-minute intro practice and then a 15-minute longer practice. Yeah, and back.
I'm just curious. I know John in front of me asked a question about transition, from a private sector to a public sector.
Uh-huh.
I actually work with at-risk girls in the community group. And I'm curious how you handle any kind of strong emotions or maybe a little the middle school. How, like what your standard process is there, because as much as we like to teach them to sit with that discomfort,
Yeah.
sometimes a lot more can come out of it in the moment.
Yeah. And there are a lot of ways that comes up. Yeah. I mean, it's always on a case-by-case basis. I would say that what I've learned from some of the early experiences was to expect that will happen, and to teach in a way that prepares them for it from the beginning. And usually what that involves is front-loading kindness and self-kindness, and front-loading this sense of really understanding how much I can handle right now and how much I particularly feel like handling right now. As far as this question of, when I'm sitting and doing bodily awareness or doing emotional awareness, what am I going to actually dive into in this group right now? And really encouraging gentleness. And I think that's really what's behind, Doug's encouragement that nobody has to do this practice if they don't want to do it right now. That's totally fine. I've had experiences in the middle school classes where, there was a student in one of the first classes I taught at the middle school who was just like really presenting as not wanting to be there and not wanting to do the practice. And I consulted with his teacher afterwards, and she asked, should I tell him that he should be sitting more still, or should I tell him he should close his eyes, or should I intervene in some way, And as a good mindfulness teacher, it's of course not, just sort of let him sort of be in his own space. And then a few lessons later, I noticed, he was pretty fidgety the whole time. He didn't seem like he'd been doing the practice, but when we talked about it, it was this practice of emotional awareness. And he raised his hand and he said, I noticed I felt really anxious. And I said, oh, what did that feel like? And he described it sort of, maybe felt tight in his elbows or in his fists, or it felt kind of shaky. And I said, well, what did you do? Like, how did you notice that? Or what did you do when you noticed that? And he goes, well, I just breathed into it like you told me to. And the conversation sort of went on, and eventually, the question was, well, how did it feel when you just let yourself notice it? And he said, well, it wasn't as bad as it usually is. It wasn't so bad. And I say that story because that's like the ideal story. Most of the stories are, the kid doesn't quite get to that point, but that's kind of possible. And sometimes that's happening even if students don't share it. Did that answer your question?
I might just add.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I'm not a professional, and I'm very aware of that. Like, in a way, if someone has a serious,
Right.
like, underlying, just getting a read of the room, like, there's something that's like, that feels big and too big for me. I'm, very much in contact with the counselor. I'm good. Yeah, thanks. But yeah, I just feel like that's kind of an important piece too, of just being in touch with the counselor and kind of knowing what's back in the kind of story of a lot of the kids too.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. That too. Yeah. Any other questions before I hand it off? Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So for the third grade
Mhm.
classes that you teach, where do you get your inspiration for the curriculum? Like, I think you do 9 weeks, you said?
Mhm.
And I'm just curious where you get the inspiration.
Sort of a hodgepodge. Mindful Schools curriculum was sort of a good way of sort of understanding an arc. Still Quiet Place has good thoughts. Mindful Way of Education, Daniel Rich-Dawson's book, has good thoughts. And then honestly, just seeing what lands in one iteration and then building on that in the next one is kind of the way it works in that one. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Ben, and this is John Luke. And today we're just going to tell the story of how we progressed through Doug's program at Middlesex, the impact it had on us, and about a project that we're doing going forward to try to get this model into more schools.
Can everyone hear us all right, by the way? Oh, yeah. Cool. So this is us in junior year of high school, back in the day. And so we both came to the mindfulness practice our sophomore year, and we sort of came for different reasons. I came because I was a tennis player, and an angry tennis player, and I wanted to figure out how I could sort of improve my mental game, because I knew how important it was to stay calm on the court, but then I just couldn't do it. And so that's why I came to the practice.
I was also on the team, but I didn't care about tennis. He was the captain, I was on the bench. But I came to mindfulness more out of kind of a sheer curiosity. By our sophomore year, Doug was kind of just a recognizable face on campus. I would see him in the dining hall on the quad. He invaded remember that room that he showed that he was saying the best room? That was where I always studied, and he invaded that space. So I just one day struck up a conversation with him, heard about what he was doing and got intrigued. And my main motivation for taking that first class was to see if I could benefit my academics and concentration.
And so we came for pretty specific reasons, mine a little bit more to like focus on one skill. But what we quickly realized after that first semester was that the practice wasn't really, I mean, it could help us in like certain things, but it was really sort of a lifestyle. It was something that we could apply to dealing with stress, but also like figuring out how to best handle our relationships, how to cultivate compassion, just generally being more present in sort of every facet of our life.
Yeah, and it also was very important to us in having Doug as a role model. He was a role model like we've never had before, in that we kind of looked up to just how he was in his day-to-day, moment-to-moment interactions, how he really embodied the values that we learned about in mindfulness class.
And so after we graduated, we decided that we were going to take a gap year together before going to Bowdoin. And if you're wondering whether or not we sort of do everything together, the answer is yes. And so partly to explore our curiosity with this practice, we decided to do a program through Where There Be Dragons in Nepal, where we got to explore Buddhism a little bit, practice a 10-day retreat with a monk that Ben is standing with named Lama Sherab. And that sort of year we spent just sort of, taking time off from school, but also following our interest in the practice.
And what's also kind of important and awesome to note is even after we graduated Middlesex, we maintained a pretty close relationship with Doug. Even after graduation, we felt like we were part of the Middlesex mindfulness community, and that our support was, and that our practice was supported by that community.
And so more recently over the summers, we've pursued the practice even a little more, doing a couple short retreats. This last summer I worked for Doug writing about the Middlesex program and sort of getting exposed to the awesome mindfulness community, going to some conferences and helping out with retreats in any way I could.
Yeah, and this past summer, part of what I did was work for an NGO in Nepal, and I actually got to go back to that monastery with Lama Sherab and make a fundraising video for them to raise money to rebuild their monastery after the earthquake in Nepal in 2015.
And so when we got to Bowdoin, we quickly realized that we weren't going to have the same sort of structural support for our practice. And so we sort of took it upon ourselves to practice and follow our interest in mindfulness. I actually studied abroad in India last semester and studied Buddhism and meditation in a monastery. And then also more recently, we've been putting together a club with a couple of other students who are more interested in mindfulness. And right now, we're in the works of having 6 days a week, a student-led or one faculty-led meditation group that gets together, open to all students and faculty members.
Yeah, and we've also been working on getting mindfulness speakers to come to campus. Like Doug said, just last weekend, Doug and Jess came to campus and gave a talk and led a mini retreat. And then also I'm involved in the student government at Bowdoin, and through that I've been kind of nudging administration along to hire someone to support our practice.
And so clearly the model at Middlesex worked really well for us. I'm pretty interested in mindfulness. And we wanted to talk about why we think it works so well. And the first reason is that Doug was such a great fit for the community. There's a big sort of, as he was talking about, athlete crowd. I was an athlete, and so was Ben, even though he doesn't give himself as much credit. And Doug, also being a graduate, really sort of understood the mindset of a Middlesex student, and so that got a lot of student buy-in. The students felt like sort of immediately comfortable with him. And the other thing is that he was also clearly an experienced practitioner. We bought into the practice because we could see the way Doug was acting in class and sort of embodying all the values that he was teaching. He was a really good role model in that sense.
And the other reason why the program was so effective for us was Doug's constant presence on campus. This is a constant present week to week. Like at Middlesex, we definitely both had weeks where we didn't find time in our crazy schedule to practice outside of the classroom. But because we had mindfulness class every week, we kind of stuck with the practice. We'd always sign up for those classes. And then a constant present year to year. that allowed the kind of teacher-student relationship to really grow and develop. And Doug was able to continue to give us advice even as we were developing in our own practice over the course of 3 years.
And the last piece is sort of that high school is a pretty, formative time. And looking back on it now and seeing sort of the ways that we've confronted new challenges in college, and we just feel so grateful that we had that foundation planted in us before we went on to college, especially compared to some of our friends who did not have the same exposure. We feel just sort of more prepared to handle the challenges and the stress of college.
So we are big advocates of Doug's model, Doug's kind of full-time model. Doug alluded to some other models that different schools are taking up, and those models are great, like a 7-day intensive course where someone comes in from outside of that's not a part of the community, leads workshops, and then leaves, or some teachers will lead a 1-minute moment of silence at the beginning of class or assembly. There's lots of different kinds of models, and we are just going to kind of explain what we view as the impact of these different models, highlighting the real effectiveness of the full-time director model. So John Luke came up with these kind of awesome visual graphics that map the impact of these different models, and he's going to explain it now.
Yeah, so basically up here on the top, you have the different communities that would be in a school that you'd want to sort of reach with your mindfulness program. So you have like the student group, the faculty and staff, alumni, parents, and other schools. And then on the bottom here, which is a little small and hard to read, you have like the development of a program. And as it sort of develops, it reaches more of the population within that school community. And the last factor, or the last part of it, is this arrow, which sort of marks the potential for that model to grow into like a developed program. And so a couple things that contribute to potential are how much time the actual person who's in charge of the program has. So in this case, the centerpiece is an English teacher who practices a little on the side. Another thing that influences the potential is how experienced they are practicing, whether or not they are compatible with the community that they're teaching in. And also another thing can be whether or not funding is required for that position.
Just move on to the next one. Yeah, so just to kind of go over the specific example of an English teacher who might have a pretty consistent practice that teaches classes on the side. Obvious pro is that some students are getting experience to mindfulness, getting that initial introduction. The obvious drawback, like John Lick was saying, was time and potentially student buy-in. In the experience of Doug, students really buy in and trust Doug as a really solid figure in mindfulness because that's his full-time job. This is an example of a good first step model that both Doug and Adam went through. It's a part-time mindfulness director at a high school. The obvious pros is that this practitioner gets to know the community and really be part of a community. They're a serious practitioner, so they'll get that student buy-in and they'll be able to really advise students and faculty as they develop in their own practice. And all these things lead for high potential growth. The cons of this model is the time constraint. Like Doug was saying, when you saw his schedule, when you have a full-time mindfulness director, it's not like they're sitting around for half the day. There's so many people that could benefit from this practice, and once that cultural shift happens in a school, there'll be people to fill those spots. So a part-time mindfulness director wouldn't be able to reach as many students and faculty as there will be interest.
And so this slide is sort of the director of mindfulness model. You can tell that we're biased because of how much more intricate it is. And this is modeled after the way the Middlesex program developed. So sort of each one of these ripples represents another development. So starting with Sunday classes, then Friday classes, the addition of parent classes, the retreat, level 3, the whole school meditating together in chapel. And so again, the things to highlight with this is that basically the difference between this model and the previous model is that this has all the pros of the part-time position. A dedicated practitioner can be in charge of the program and sort of hold that position for all the rest of the school. And also, they can sort of understand, like take time to understand the community and become like a good fit for that community and tailor like a mindfulness program to fit the needs of that, of the students, of the faculty, of the parents. And then the big difference here between this one and the last model is time. With the full-time position, you have time to accommodate all students that have busy schedules. You can have parent classes. You can reach out to alumni. Over the summer, there's a retreat. And the other thing is Doug's constant presence on campus. That was a really big part of the reason the program succeeded too. Sort of seeing him walking around every day was kind of a reminder of the practice, which you don't, it's easy to not think about mindfulness when you're, in English class getting yelled at about grammar. And so seeing him, even if it was just for a second to remind you be present for that second, and then it was gone, that still sort of reinforces the program a lot. And then you can also start building these relationships. Since he eats in the dining hall, you can really get to know him and buy into the practice even more. And so the cool thing about this, if we return for why the model worked for us, is that not to discredit at all how amazing Doug is, but this is a reproducible model, as we saw with Adam as well. The fit for the community, experience as a practitioner, these are all things that are not specific to one person, that can work in any school community as long as you find the right person to hold that position.
Yeah, so like Doug was saying, everybody in this room probably agrees that mindfulness should be in schools. So based off our own experience and a growing body of research, meditation is a highly impactful skill and practice that we both think should be part of the educational system. And we also firmly believe that Middlesex's full-time mindfulness director model is the most effective way to implement a mindfulness program at a high school. And then there's also lots of interested schools. We know Doug gets emails almost every day asking him about his program and how they can transfer it to their program. There's a lot of schools who really want to provide this for their students. And then we also know that there are a lot of dedicated practitioners who would love to be doing what Doug and Adam are doing. So
we've sort of come up with this idea for a project, and basically our mission would be to facilitate the integration of mindfulness into school communities using the full-time director of mindfulness model. So a closer look at what basically our plan is to get this program growing.
Yeah, so firstly, we'd want to connect interested schools with qualified mindfulness teachers who would be a good fit for that school. Emphasis on qualified mindfulness teachers and emphasis on good fit. So just emphasize that whole point. Secondly, to support the process financially, Doug and Adam both had some seed money, whether that was from a parent donation, grant, etc. And in order for many schools to kind of adopt this model, they're going to need kind of what Adam was talking about, a 3-year period where they can let that person ease into their community. And a lot of schools will need financial assistance in aiding that financial transition. So we would love to collect donor dollars and make that possible.
And the other two pieces are to provide ongoing support and resources for the programs to continue to grow. That could look at talking about different curriculums or providing input on how to reach out to different student groups on campus. And the last piece would be to build a mindfulness teaching community, to sort of be an organization that facilitates conversations between schools that are doing this kind of work, between teachers that have great ideas that are working in a specific community, and so they can share that with other people that are interested in doing the same work.
So right now, we're at the stage in this process where we need to start forming relationships. Specifically, we want to form relationships with interested teachers, interested schools, and interested donors. So if you fall into one of those three categories or know anyone that might, please send them our way at direct.mindfulness@gmail.com.
We made that email last night. And yeah, I mean, I guess just reflecting, we're so grateful for the mindfulness program that we went through at Middlesex, and we sort of just hope that this could be something that could be exposed, that all students could have some exposure to, especially before they get to college, especially before sort of real life starts coming at you faster than you realize. And so, thank you.
Any questions?
How about if we take a break, Megan? Sure. Why don't we take about a 5-minute break just to get some snacks and people need to use the restroom, and then come back and ask questions? Great. Thank you, everybody.
For any of the brave few who can still hang in there, we're happy to answer any questions for just however long, and feel free to go in the middle of this, but just very informal. If anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer, and if no, that's okay too.
There's a question that came in online from the Facebook live stream, so why don't we start with that? And ask. So there's someone who's viewing from New Mexico, where suicide has been a big problem, and she was wondering, this came in during your part, Doug, so how has your work affected the school in terms of suicide rate, if it has, or just mental health in general?
That's a great question. I mean, our director of health maybe could answer this better than I can.
I mean, it's such a small sample set, right? So it's hard to know, and it's hard to know what you're doing, whether that's preventative or not. I'd like to think it is, but it's hard, it's hard to know. All I can speak to is just sort of it's more than a tool, but it is a tool that students have that's, among other things that we're offering kids in terms of a community where you're known and needed, where there's a community life curriculum that's really important to, character development and relationship building. And so it's certainly part of the scaffolding for sure. That's all I can say.
Yeah, beautiful. Do you want to add anything, Adam? Yeah.
So I have a colleague who is thinking of developing a course at a law school, and I'm about to talk to her this week, but I don't know if you have thoughts about whether a singular course is really going to do much, or whether you really need to develop these other pieces that you were talking about, these other structural pieces that are kind of embedded all over the community.
Yeah, I guess my thinking is like it all starts with that, and every little bit, and I think even people talk really this debate about how much practice is needed, and I think there's no clear, so much of it depends on the situation, the community, and that that's kind of at least in my process of teaching, there's times I'm diving in, but then I needed more practice, and so it's kind of like this balance of the two. And I mean that's the thing. These guys are at Bowdoin, and in the scheme of it, it's they don't have a ton of practice if you're talking about comparing to monks in Burma, but they're having an impact. So it's like, and they're an impact on a number of people. So I think it's I don't know. I don't know if that answers it.
I may add as well that so we listed those like 3 possible models at a school, and I think the 4th model, which is actually the most common model, is people downloading random apps. Is probably like most schools have that model going on right now without them knowing it. And in that regard, a lot of the parents who come in to my parent classes, and even faculty, it's like they're like stepping up from the app level of practice, and the app level of practice, like in a soothing voice, will tell them to pay attention to their breath really well, but like everything else, they're sort of in deep water on, usually, depending. They are good apps. And so, what a class like that does is it gives people who have different levels of practice the opportunity to talk with somebody with a depth of understanding that can set them on a path that's really going to be more useful for them personally. And so I think that, in the absence of any sort of ongoing community creation, at least official, right, community creation, I think that like a course like that, where over the course of weeks, people can understand, the different inroads to practice and different ways of working with like troublesome areas of their own practice, is probably going to have a huge impact. And it could ultimately lead to, right, the other kinds of things.
Platform, or you're trying to engage in an institution, they're going to want some sort of evidence-based model. And I was curious, like, how you manage that expectation. Like, I know you had the assessment, which I thought was really good. Was that a self-assessment, or? Yeah. Yep. They kind of fill out those after every kind of the required freshman or required new student courses. I think for me, it'll be different than Adam. For me, it was very much the trustee had a sense of mindfulness already. So he kind of knew the power of it. The parent took the parent course. So that was funding that came through that. And then I think we didn't really have, our headmasters very much, she, regardless of like the science, she's trusting what she's seeing on campus and hearing, and that was good enough for her. But that not always the case.
Yeah, I'll say too, like the school itself tends to really buy the qualitative proof because that's what it sees every day. That's what the administrators are running into every day. But for me though, the grant funder has really kept me very attuned to any time I can add a number to what I'm doing. And so one of those ways is in quantifying the percentage of faculty members who have opted in to take the faculty course, and then the percentage who show up to follow-up drop-in courses, right, would be one way. Or the percentage of students who say that during the mindfulness course they did have a daily practice to some extent, or the percentage who then opt into mindfulness club. And so usually the numbers end up being just, can we gauge the school's sense that it's helping them based upon who's volunteering their time for them. That's most of it. I really tried to do, especially in the 6th grade science class, tried to do like design experiments, around cortisol levels or around attention span. But it's really hard to do something that's not just a fake experiment, in a middle school like that. So I haven't gotten there yet.
So this may be too large a question, but for someone, I'm a clinical social worker and I work in a public school, a middle school, and I'm just wondering if of everything you've talked about, if there were one thing that if you felt like I could go in and say, I'd like to start with this, like I even just grabbed hold of like your mindfulness lunch. And I was thinking, can I sit down with my administration and say, I'd like to be able to, I mean, they're all, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what's one small thing in a school that doesn't have this at all.
Yeah.
I know it's a large, we gotta start somewhere.
Yep.
It's so necessary.
Yeah, I think, I mean, so many factors around who's introducing it. I think depending on the person would be the population to start with, I think. It, like, 'cause in some cases, the parents might be the best, or you know, maybe the person feels more called to the younger students, or they have a particular kind of hobby or a club that they could kind of work it in with, like if it's sports, or, you know, maybe you want to bring it through art, or, you know, different arenas. So I just think it so depends on, I mean, I'd love to give an easy answer. I just think it so depends on the person and their interests and the community's needs. Yeah. Good.
Provide an easy answer.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be the wrong answer. I mean, if I were in your position, you know, the things that I've found land the best, especially in the middle and upper school grade levels, are finding a group of kids, who buy into it, right? So maybe not entering into a conscript audience, but figuring out who are the kids who are gonna self-identify as interested. And then, you know, for me, the language that helps at those upper grades with interest is test anxiety or test stress. That, you know, students across a spectrum of issues and needs find that it's pretty socially acceptable to say that you get stressed around tests. And so test anxiety is a sort of like code catch-all for a lot of things. And so if you get a group of students, and then what that also means is probably they're pretty motivated if they're coming in around test anxiety. And so if you get a group of young people who basically say, you know, I want tools to deal with test anxiety, then, I mean, at least from my perspective, you have a group of kids who already have that self-identified buy-in. You have a smaller group. And at least for anybody who's looking in on the group, the name test anxiety and the idea of getting them tools to deal with that is like very clear what you're all about. And then you go from there, right? That could be the wrong answer. Yeah.
Final questions?
Were there any questions? I have a question about kind of how you've seen mindfulness affect the culture within a rigorous private school. I don't know the Middlesex culture very well, but I understand that it's a pretty rigorous school and where students work very, very hard. And my experience with some other private schools is that there can be almost a culture that sort of supports a sense of if I'm not working so hard that I'm getting sick or I'm not sleeping, then I'm not working hard enough somehow. And I'm wondering if you've seen mindfulness and self-compassion shift that at all, and sort of maybe make it okay to not push yourself to quite those limits, or can you speak to that?
I mean, yeah, Ben and John can answer this one.
Yeah, when I like to think about the cultural shift that happened at Middlesex, it's not as related to academics, but I can talk about that too. But it's when you have like football bros in the locker room talking about compassion, like you're doing something right. And I would say, yeah, like the vocabulary surrounding mindfulness kind of worked its way into conversations about a lot of things, academics included. And in specific regard to your question about like the need to be busy, like the social expectation that if you're not busy, you're not doing something right. I would say that probably still exists at Middlesex, but definitely it's a step in the right direction. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I would just say there's an interesting like dynamic that I notice this a lot at Bowdoin too, which feels the same as Middlesex, and that drive to just always be doing something. And like 9 out of 10 students, if you ask if they're going to go to the gym, they'll include that as like a productive thing to do. And like subtly, there's been a shift towards also realizing that going to like meditate is not a waste of time. It's sort of like going to the gym in a lot of ways, and there's been people like friends of ours and just people that we've interacted with that are starting to realize that I can take half an hour off and go meditate, or even 5 minutes instead of like going for a run. And so that's been a pretty cool shift, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's how we get people to go to our mindfulness club. Like, it's the same problem happening at Bowdoin, and we can say, like, they say, oh, I have so much work, and we're like, oh, you'll be so much more efficient after meditation. And that's how we get them to go.
And isn't it the hour of mindfulness gives you 4 hours of sleep or something like that? So 15 minutes will give them an extra hour of sleep. So I'm sure none of them are sleeping either. So
Yeah.
maybe that works out.
I don't have a question, but I have a funny story. It keeps popping into my head. Years ago, I sat down with my husband in our living room. This was before we had a daughter. And I told him to close his eyes, that I wanted to see if he wanted to try like mindfulness breathing. And he closed his eyes and we sat there for a minute and I said, kind of talked him through. I don't have the training you guys have, obviously. But I talked him through and all of a sudden I hear him go, and I look at him and I go, are you okay? What's wrong? He goes, man, I can't do this. I'm going to pass out. He goes, I had no idea I was so uptight. He's like, you wouldn't believe the things that came into my head just now. I can't do this.
Yeah,
So,
it's pretty scary.
yeah. But I think since then, in the years since then, because he'll now talk about mindfulness like to relatives, friends, whoever he can think of, because he's looked into it so much since then that he's really realized that it's something that can bring him better in a good way. It's helpful.
Well, thank you so much.